Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I'm Jet, that's Sap. Sap's got a full blue background now behind him. He is tinkered, he has toiled, and he has made himself a nice background. Well, I don't know if it's nice. It's better than what it was, Sap.
It is better than what it was. I already divulged the secret of what it is, but I'm not going to do that again. And then I like wearing flat colors. Flat colors being I don't like patterns. When you're a bigger guy, you don't want to have a lot going on with your clothes. So I'm wearing this burnt orange shirt, so I look like I'm part of the Texas Longhorns staff. So the colors are, bold. My shirt and my background, as I said, it's kind of got a little Dick Tracy feel to it. So,
the other day, Seb, somebody from I forget her last name, but Charlie something from the WNBA draft was the first pick was from Texas. So are you celebrating the WNBA draft?
Exactly.
That's what it is.
That's what I'm doing.
I knew it. Right away I saw that for orange.
I don't want to piss off Kevin Durant, who went to Texas.
Ooh, smart. Yeah.
See
smart.
That?
Don't piss him off.
Hi, KD. Love you.
It's really, really difficult to piss that guy off. He has got some thick skin on him. Never really has actually had thick skin. He's always been very skinny.
No.
So Sap, let's talk about you love you're the exception to this, which is strange to me, but I like it. You're the older generation here on this show, but you identify more with the younger generation. You push back to the get off my lawn people. I feel like even though you do have a podcast called Get Off My Lawn Podcast, you're not that type of person. No. You're the type of person that grew up with basketball in the 80s, and you love basketball in the 80s, but say it's better now. Not a lot of people like you.
No, very few, especially in my age group. The 70s were good. That's where I really started to watch basketball. The 70s was a fun decade because teams didn't repeat. That was never happening. Actually, the Celtics repeated in 68 and 69. It didn't happen again for 20 years when the Lakers won a title in 87 and 88. In between, no one repeated.
Parity.
Now it's very common to repeat. Yeah, you just had, sometimes one-hit wonders. The Golden State Warriors won the title in 1975, and then the Celtics in 76, and Portland in 77, and Washington in 78. They finally broke through, and then the Sonics in 79. But then once Magic Johnson and Larry Bird came into the league, they dominated. Magic won 5 titles. Bird won 3. They were the dominant teams in the 80s. The 80s, to me, is still the greatest decade of competitive basketball. The play is better now. I mean, the depth in the league right now is better than it's ever been because, quite frankly, now you're tapping into the entire world. Back then, it was an American game. Now you have players from South America, from Australia, from Europe. Heck, the top 4 vote getters in the MVP this year might all be foreign-born players, right? Whether it's Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Giannis, and Joel Embiid. Those are all foreign-born players. I think that's going to probably be 1 through 4 in MVP voting. So the depth of talent in the league now is better than it's ever been. Just look at the All-Star games. I mean, you saw in the 90s, Vin Baker was going to an All-Star game. Eddie Jones went to multiple All-Star games. They were good players, but they would not come close to playing in an All-Star game in this era. Look at the players that didn't make the All-Star game this year. Someone like Jimmy Butler or Karl Anthony Towns. The list is endless. So, yeah, I'm one of those guys. I think basketball is now better than it's ever been. I think the 90s was the most overrated decade. I thought the game was ugly. It was coming off of 6 new teams becoming expansion teams into the league, and the league hadn't expanded yet to Europe. The really first major foreign star was Dirk. Now we can, start getting into technicalities and say Olajuwon, who was born and brought up in Nigeria, but he played in the American college system playing at the University of Houston. So Dirk was really like that first foreign player. That was 1998. Jordan was done by then. So I think the 90s is vastly overrated. I think the play was ugly. I'm sure you probably liked it more than I would have because you like defense. Marcus Smart would have been probably a household name in the 90s. Now it's playing tackles. Yeah, tackle football. That's what it was. So, yeah, I don't like the get off my lawn mentality of a lot of these old players. Like Charles Barkley, we heard saying he hates the Nets because, they came together and formed the super team. Well, Charles demanded a trade to the Houston Rockets to play with Hakeem Olajuwon and then recruited Scottie Pippen. Could we say that Olajuwon, Barkley, and Pippen is a pretty good big 3? And they were all past their prime and they didn't win anything. but they formed a super team. So why does Barkley have a problem with the Nets doing it now when he didn't have a problem doing it 25 years ago?
No, we don't acknowledge that, and I just agree with Barkley for hating the Nets. Another guy who is part of that get off my lawn part, and was one of the best players in the aforementioned '80s, one of the greatest players of all time. In fact, Dr. J, Julius Erving, he played for both the Nets when he was in the ABA and then the 76ers in the NBA, the two teams that everybody's talking about in the Eastern Conference in terms of vying for the title. Sleeping on Milwaukee, I'm telling you. But meanwhile, Dr. J was on a podcast with Danny Green, who is currently a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. He said he had this to say in regards to the Brooklyn Nets. It's reminiscent of how the Yankees used to do it all the time. They load up. They call it buying a championship. The Lakers are known for doing that too. I agree. They're getting all these pieces. They don't know at the end of the season what it's going to look like or what it's going to feel like, but they're going to be formidable. You've got a team with 6 former All-Stars and 3 All-NBA guys who have been there and succeeded in the playoffs. So the money quote there is that they're trying to buy a championship, and I did like that he also took a shot at the Lakers. So he takes a shot at my 2 least favorite teams currently in the NBA. Suddenly I'm becoming a lot bigger of a Dr. J fan than I ever was before. Sap, being the guy who watched Dr. J and loved watching Dr. J play, but also being the guy who loves basketball today and is not that get off my lawn mentality, how did this quote strike you?
It was kind of surprising because usually Dr. J is not the get off my lawn guy. He's not. He was the face of the league for about a 5 to 6 year period, right? When the merger happened in 1976. It really wasn't a merger. 4 ABA teams joined the NBA. The ABA was going to fold. The 4 best teams, it was an absorption. Exactly. It was not really a merger. But, man, the ABA was loaded with talent because the 4 teams came in and were pretty good in the NBA. I mean, Denver became a top-tier team right away. San Antonio was competitive. The New Jersey Nets not, because they had to sell Dr. J. So, they were pretty good teams. And then all the players from the other teams went into a draft, and you just had an endless supply of great players. George McGinnis had gone from the ABA to the NBA a couple of years earlier as a free agent, but Maurice Lucas, Artis Gilmore, George Gervin, just great players all throughout, all Hall of Famers. So, the league was talented and deep, and it worked well for the NBA. And then in 1976, when this happened, Dr. J became the face of the league. He was the most popular player. He did things that most of us had never seen before. I mean, Connie Hawkins and Elgin Baylor before him elevated the game.
Wasn't he the face of basketball, Sep?
Oh, absolutely.
Even when he was in the ABA, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
He was probably right there because the best player in the NBA at that time was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And look, even when Dr. J came into the NBA, Kareem was still the best player, but Kareem was never the face of the league. Generally, big men aren't the face of the league, especially big men who are kind of reclusive. And I love Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He's one of my favorite athletes, but he's not an outgoing personality. He's not Shaq. He's not Joel Embiid. He's the complete opposite.
Very serious.
Very serious guy, measured, smart, writes op-ed pieces for the New York Times. I mean, this is someone who, you literally should look up to, and he is 7'2". But Dr. J was always more of the happy guy and the class guy. He was like one of the first athletes that you saw that dressed really stylish. His game was stylish. The finger roll, the ability to dunk over people. I mean, just YouTube his dunk over Michael Cooper back in the early 80s. It's breathtaking even today. He won a dunk contest in the ABA. He was the first guy that dunked from the free throw line. But he was also a great player. If you want to compare him to someone today, it would be Kawhi Leonard, about the same size. Dr. J was a really good defender. I think he was a more dominant offensive player going to the basket, good rebounder, good passer. I have him as the 21st greatest player of all time. But to go back to this conversation, I was surprised that he came out with this because he's not normally that guy. You expect Charles Barkley to go there because he's the get off my lawn guy. Like, back in my day, this is how we did it. But Dr. J is saying that the Nets are trying to buy a team, which I guess they are. They signed 2 free agents, right? Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and then they traded for James Harden. Did they do anything illegal there? I mean, they signed 2 free agents. They had 2 max contracts, as Kyrie Irving told Kevin Durant at the All-Star game 2 years ago. And then, look, it's not their fault that Houston screwed up the Harden deal. They should have got more from Brooklyn or maybe offered him to another team. And then we saw Aldridge and Blake Griffin joined, and now Aldridge is retired. The only problem I have with this, and I do with Barkley, as I said, who joined Pippen in Houston with Hakeem Olajuwon, they didn't win. Just look at the players Dr. J got to play with in his 12 years in the NBA. He goes to Philadelphia in 1976. They have George McGinnis, who was a great player who really underperformed in the postseason, but they had George McGinnis, Maurice Cheeks. Then they traded McGinnis for Bobby Jones. Then they got Moses Malone, which is one of the most one-sided trade in the history of basketball in 1982. That put them over the top to win a championship. And also he played a few years with Charles Barkley. McGinnis, Mo Cheeks, Bobby Jones, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, all in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Bobby Jones, incredibly underrated player.
You would have loved him. You would have loved Bobby Jones. He was a more highly skilled version of Marcus Smart.
Look at the numbers on him. They're really good.
Defensively, he was spectacular. He was. And he'd go out and get you 15 points, 7, 8 rebounds. He was a great, great player. Was at North Carolina as well. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Dr. J also played with an all-star in Steve Mix, who was not a great player, but he did make the all-star team once. Doug Collins, if he had not been bereft of or just suffered so many injuries, would have been a Hall of Famer. World B. Free was an all-star. He played with him. And also Andrew Toney is another guy, if he hadn't had all the injuries, I think was headed for the Hall of Fame. He played with an incredible, he was called the Boston Strangler. He played with this incredible group of players, and they won one title. They lost twice to the Lakers in the finals, and they lost once to Portland in the finals. But the 76ers kept adding. I mean, when they got Moses Malone, it almost seemed unfair. And for that 1 year, it was unfair. I still maintain that Sixers team, 82-83, may have been the most dominant team I've ever seen. They lost one game in the playoffs.
Yeah, this is coming from NBC Sports, just talking about this quote from Dr. J, just to give you some more context. Philadelphia paid the Nets $3 million to acquire Dr. J. Then they signed Dr. J to a renegotiated $3 million contract in 1976, just to show you how much less players made back then, $3 million in 1976. The Sixers, who were already paying George McGinnis, Doug Collins, Fred Carter, Caldwell Jones, and Daryl Dawkins.
Two other players I didn't mention,
to what the New York Times at the time called huge salaries.
Yep.
They immediately became a championship contender. Then they, got Moses Malone, as you mentioned, to a contract worth $11.8 million in 1982. So they're arguing that Philly came a lot more close to actually buying a championship by the letter of the law. Listen, I agree more with Dr. J. I hate this super teams and guys teaming up on the same thing. I have less of a problem with them acquiring James Harden because that's just playing on the other team's stupidity. That's nothing. Then that's it wrong. Then Kyrie and Kevin Durant, colluding together to join forces. That bothers me. I can't stand that. I'll never fault a team for compiling assets, or in the case of the Nets, what appeared to be some sort of assets in terms of what Houston thought that they were, and making a trade. Maybe that's because I thought the Celtics did a really good job to acquire enough assets and play on the stupidity of the Minnesota Timberwolves and trade for Kevin Garnett. But I look at that as, if you want to call it this way, the right way to build a super team, where you have a strategy, you acquire and or accumulate assets, and then you cash them in for a trade, as opposed to guys say, I want to go play there with my buddy, and like what LeBron did with the Heat, and that's how you build a super team. I think that there's not, I don't look at them as the same thing.
Okay, so but is it okay that the Lakers acquired assets, built assets, and traded them for Anthony Davis? Is that okay? That's the same as Kevin Garnett.
Yes, but with the caveat of that Anthony Davis forced a trade only to the Lakers. Kevin Garnett didn't even want to initially get traded to the Celtics.
Because he loved playing for the Timberwolves. And the other thing, too, is LeBron James is a draw. We can admit that. Like, if LeBron James is on a team, other players want to play there. Maybe not all of them, but many of them do. The league is very mobile now because of LeBron James. When he decided to go to Miami, it made the league more mobile. I don't even know if he's going to end his career with the Lakers. He could go play for another team after his contract expires with the Lakers. I mean, in my fantasy land, he ends up with the Celtics and shows Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum how to win a championship. So, but my whole part of this is that the 76ers for that period of time continually did what they had to do. I mean, just getting Dr. J was a money move, and Moses Malone, they didn't give up much to get him, and he wanted to go from Houston to Philadelphia. The league was different then. It didn't have the money that it has now. Let me tell you a funny story about the 76ers, the 82-83 season. They were dominant. They just were better than everybody. Moses Malone was the league MVP. Dr. J was still great. Bobby Jones was the ultimate role player. Andrew Toney and Mo Cheeks was probably the best or second best backcourt in basketball that year. And for a couple of years before that and after it, they spent so much money on their payroll. And again, the league was completely different then. I think in 1983, the Celtics sold for $12 million. Now the Celtics are worth probably $2.5 to $3 billion.
Yeah.
And the Celtics at that point, in context, were a bigger brand. I mean, they and the Lakers and Sixers were the three teams in the NBA. The 76ers spent so much money on payroll, they would fly into cities on game days. Like, so if the Sixers were playing the Celtics on a Wednesday night, they would fly in on Wednesday and rent cars at Logan Airport and drive to the game. And then after the game, would get back in those rental
to
cars.
avoid the hotel?
The hotel, buses. All I can picture is Dr. J driving with like three teammates. And the joke was Dr. J was not a really good driver. As great as he was as a basketball player, he just the skill set didn't work behind the wheel. The hair, just huge hands. Dr. J had trouble as a perimeter shooter. He was never really a great perimeter shooter. He had enormous hands, but that helped him go into the basket with the finger roll and the ability to just, go in the air and hang, which he did better than anybody. But that's what the 76ers were. The league was completely different then. I remember going into the locker room after a Sixers-Celtics game. Moses Malone didn't even shower. Like he had the warm-up suit with a mink coat over it. And, he barely talked to the media. He was a shy guy, and he didn't really find the need to speak to anybody. He did his talking on the court where he was the best player in basketball at that point. But that's how the league was then. Now, it's completely different. I mean, they're going in first-class hotels. Some of these teams own their own planes. I mean, it's a different league than it was back then.
As I say, 84 was the first year for a salary cap in the NBA, too. So, the Sixers were able to, as were, before that, the Celtics and the Lakers were all able to take advantage of being in a big market and, not having a salary cap. Now, obviously, you're beholden to that, though, as you see with, the buyout market and stuff, you can circumvent that if you really, really need to. I just thought it was an interesting quote from Dr. J, who, he's not Charles Barkley, and he's not like, Magic Johnson, who are the guys who are constantly in the, you're hearing from them all the time. I don't even know if he has a Twitter account. If he does, I've never seen him tweet. And so he was, on this podcast, in fairness, with a 76er player and Danny Green, and he's a 76er guy. He's more loyal to Philadelphia than he is to the Nets, despite that he played for the Nets. He played for the Nets in New Jersey, and he didn't want to continue to play for them when he got into the NBA. He wanted to play for Philly.
At this point, he's a Philly guy, born and brought up in New York, went to UMass, amazingly. And here's another interesting story about Dr. J. He was drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA in 1972. So very possibly the Bucks could have had a big three of Kareem, Oscar Robertson, albeit later in his career with Dr. J. That would have been a pretty good big three, I would think.
Yeah, decent.
Pretty good big three. The Celtics beat them in 73, 74. They didn't have Dr. J. But if they had Dr. J to go along with Kareem and Oscar at that point, I think they would have won more than one championship as a franchise. Yeah, Dr. J always is, and again, I was covering the NBA back then, and he was the most accommodating superstar I think I've ever met. Win or lose, Dr. J was in the locker room, would answer every question like a gentleman. The best way to describe Dr. J was regal, right? I remember I was there courtside when he and Larry Bird got into that fight. In fact, earlier that day, a friend of mine and me, we were at Copley Plaza, which had just opened a few months ago. And Dr. J was there because the 76ers by then had decided to stay in hotels rather than fly in the day of the game. And we ran into Dr. J, and my friend at the time, who was my best friend at the time, was an enormous Dr. J fan. That was his favorite player. He got an autograph from Dr. J. He was very accommodating to my friend. And then that's the night that Bird and Dr. J got into a fight. because I think at that point, Bird had surpassed him as a player. I think in that game, Bird had like 35. Dr. J had like 6. It was the third quarter, and Bird was talking trash, which he always did. And Dr. J at that point was about 34 years old. Bird was 28, right in his prime. Dr. J was past his prime, and next thing you know, they're choking each other. I'm like, someone fought Dr. J? Because he was so regal.
Right.
That's why this is kind of surprising. And I didn't get to hear it, but I read the quotes. I'm sure even when he was saying it, he said it in a very respectful manner, because that's how Dr. J was. Whereas Barkley is the other side of the coin, where sometimes even when Charles is complimenting someone, it sounds like he wants to pick a fight with them. So it is interesting. When players bash today's game, we do have this thing called Google that we can go back and research that Charles Barkley demanded a trade to Houston to play with Olajuwon and then recruited Scottie Pippen. We can look up that Dr. J played with endless Hall of Famers and All-Stars in 12 years in Philadelphia. It's not like he had to carry a team by himself. Now, here's the thing, Jet. Is it more of a turnoff now for, say, a person like you that loves the league? Because it kind of works, right? I mean, when Durant
that drives me crazy. It does work.
It works. LeBron went to Miami. They won 2 championships. Probably should have won a third. AD goes to the Lakers in the first year. They win. We both think that, gun to head, we believe Brooklyn and the Lakers are going to meet in the finals. It kind of works. So
no, it totally works.
Like you can't push back against it and say, well, here's how you do it. Organically build your franchise through the draft, which is still a big component of this. But to put you over the top, you got to go get one of these great players. It works. So that, I think, is a turnoff to a lot of franchises. And also a league where there's certain teams, and we've thrown them out there, like the Denver Nuggets. They've been a pretty well-run franchise for a long time. They've never played in the finals. There's comparable teams in the NFL, right? Like the Detroit Lions have never played in the Super Bowl, but they really suck. For that. Whereas the Nuggets,
they have winless season.
Finals. Right. I mean, the Nuggets at least have played in the conference finals. Hell, last year they're in the conference finals. They've had really good players, whether it be, Jokic or Carmelo Anthony or Alex English or whoever.
The bigger turnoff is the places that they decide to go, because they're the massive cities or the warm cities. So it's like, we didn't talk about this when we talked about the Celtics and Lakers in our last podcast, but something that always irks me about the Lakers is the crap Lakers team you saw the other night, that the loss to the Celtics. That's more in line with what they should be based off of how their management of the team actually has been. The fact that they have LeBron James has nothing to do with them building like a strong culture or coaching staff or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that they're based in Los Angeles. So that's what frustrates me. And I think frustrates a lot of fans too, is like, you can go ass backwards into an NBA championship if you're the Lakers. If you're the Nuggets or, another team like that, or the Blazers or even the Raptors, like, you have to scrape and claw, and you cannot mess up a draft pick. You cannot mess up this or that. And even then, you still might fall short. Whereas the Lakers can, I think in those drafts, Sap, where they were picking really high, I don't know that they nailed a single one of those picks accurately as to where it should have been, who they should have taken. And yet they fell ass backwards into getting LeBron James because he wanted to come out to LA. So there's an inherent unfairness of it. And I think that bothers a lot of fans too, because despite LA being the most popular team, there's still more people who root against LA than root for LA. And so that it bothers people. And, so listen, Dr. J is obviously not remembering his own history a lot here, but I'm always going to be pro guys who bash the super teams. And like Brooklyn, I mean, they made one of the worst trades in NBA history. And again, fell ass backwards into 2 guys because they're based in New York.
You made a great point about the draft picks the Lakers had, very high draft picks. They had back-to-back draft picks that were second overall. And I tweeted this out the other night. The Lakers could very easily, if they had so chosen, had Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown instead of Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball. Now, would the Lakers then trade Brown and Tatum to get Anthony Davis? Or would LeBron still go there and say, you know what, these 2 guys are special. I can teach them how to win. I don't know what the mechanism would be. LeBron wants ready-made players rather than young guys to develop, although I know he's a big fan of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. But, yeah, they even messed up on that one. Hell, the 76ers messed up. I know they didn't win the draft lottery, but then they traded for the first pick and picked Markelle Fultz. Could you picture Philadelphia right now with Jason Tatum to go along with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid? holy crap, that team would be tough to beat. So, yeah, you're right. The Lakers are kind of the good-looking guy that gets the hot girl, doesn't need a personality, doesn't necessarily need money, but he's a good-looking guy, so all the chicks dig him. That's what the Lakers are. They don't even have to be well-run because they can go get Shaq. They can go get
They were
LeBron.
terribly run, Sap. Prior to LeBron coming there, they were terribly run. From Kobe's last, 3
Right.
years until LeBron came there, they had done basically everything wrong. And they still managed to get...
Well, when you get LeBron, you get the best executive in the league, too, right? Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, they were beholden to Kobe, too. May he rest in peace. And I know we're going to talk about him in a few moments. But they kept paying him an incredible amount of money because he had this huge cable deal. And the cable company's like, you can't let Kobe go. Right, he's the star, right? I mean, they were paying him, I think, $50 million a year or close to it for a couple of years when he was clearly not Kobe Bryant anymore. But they needed him to make sure they could sell subscriptions to the cable contract.
They also surrounded him with junk, like Smush
It was
Parker.
junk. Yeah, no, they're not. When Jerry West was there and even Mitch Kupchak, they were well run. I mean, they did trade for Kobe Bryant, who was the 13th pick in the draft. Jerry West nailed that one. Yes, they got Shaq. They had a trade for Kareem. They got lucky to get the first pick in the 79 draft, and who's sitting there? Magic Johnson. So, yeah, I mean, a little bit of luck.
No, they haven't always been poorly run, Sap. I'm saying that they did not make the right moves to get to the situation where they are right now. They just happen to be based in Los Angeles.
But it speaks to the greatness of LeBron James, right? Because you take him out of the equation, they're a middle-of-the-road team at best.
Yeah.
So, again, he's a great executive as well as a great player.
This is more of a Laker thing than the LeBron thing. It's not me bashing LeBron. It's me bashing the Lakers organization. I think it's so frustrating, because Boston is a big market, but it's cold here and it's not New York. And so it's always going to be harder for them, and they're going to have to make the right moves more often. The Lakers, I'm saying is the Lakers don't have to make the right moves. They'll always be fine. They can botch draft picks, botch signings. It doesn't matter. Somebody in free agency is going to come there who's really good, or somebody's going to demand a trade to LA because it's warm and they live there and there's celebrities there. It's always going to be the case.
Good-looking guy can, forget to go on a date, forget to pick up the girl, and he's going to get a second date because he's a good-looking guy. I can attest to that because I've done that quite often myself. But you look at that and you just say that, but it can be done other ways. The San Antonio Spurs, I don't think San Antonio's necessarily a great place to play. I mean, there's no state income tax, but that's not a destination
that's one of the smallest
for free agents
in the NBA.
Yeah, but they got lucky with Tim Duncan, and they built that kind of the way the Patriots did. Look, they got lucky with Tim Duncan. Bill Belichick got lucky with Tom Brady. So Popovich and Belichick could be a-holes all they wanted to, and they could treat their best players a-holes, and they built that culture, right? Because they got fortunate. But look, New York and Chicago haven't been relevant in decades. Now Brooklyn is, which is the New York market, because they were able to get Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. So, yeah, no, you'd like to see this be done more organically, but I'm not against these super teams because I think in the end it's going to be entertaining. And if one of them gets taken down, let's say the Milwaukee Bucks beat Brooklyn. That's a pretty fascinating story because...
Oh, God, I'd be a huge Bucks fan. I'd buy Bucks gear.
You get the antlers and everything else out. I used to have a Bucks jacket in the 80s when, that was my favorite team with Marcus Johnson.
Was it a green one or a purple one?
It was green. The Bucks had a green. It was an ugly-looking jacket, man. It was green with red and white lettering, and the Bucks... It just said BUCKS. Yeah, it was way up there. Yeah, it does have a Santa Claus feel to it. But Marcus Johnson and Sidney Moncrief were my two favorite players back then. And Moncrief's in the Hall, and I'm working to get Marcus Johnson in the Hall of Fame.
All right. So great segue, Sap, because we are going to be talking about the Hall of Fame right now as the delayed class of 2020 is going to go in on May 15th. Obviously, they weren't able to hold a ceremony last year because of COVID. This year, they are going to be able to hold the ceremony and induct what is just an unbelievably accomplished class. I mean, led by three absolute superstar players, three guys who won the MVP award, which, that does not happen very often. Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett are the headliners of this class. Any of them in their own year could be the headliner of their own class. So those three guys are the main ones getting in. Other people being inducted are Rudy Tomjanovich, who had a nice career as a player, probably a better career as a coach.
Deserves it, though. He's a really good player, too.
Eddie Sutton is getting in.
Yep.
To a very accomplished coach, Tamika Catchings, one of the great WNBA players of all time. Kim Mulkey, I'm not sure about Kim Mulkey. Sorry to
She's
her.
a women's basketball coach who got eliminated. She lost a tough game she's the Baylor coach. She lost to Connecticut in the national semifinal or the regional final. And she's the one who, was talking about it would be terrible if someone got COVID because she didn't want to have testing anymore. So she kind of lost her mind, but still a very accomplished coach.
And then Patrick Baumann, who dealt with international basketball, and Barbara Stevens, who I also believe was a women's coach. So the way the NBA Hall of Fame does it, which I think is a tremendous way to do it, and I'm not sure how long this has been going on. We were trying to do some research into this and ran into a YouTube rabbit hole, is that they used past inductees, people who are in the Hall of Fame already, to induct and introduce the new class. And that's led to some really interesting names being paired with some of these players. The most notable being Kobe Bryant getting in this year, and his inductee is who many people, myself included, consider the greatest basketball player of all time, and Michael Jordan. We've talked before on the show, Sap, and people have talked at length about the relationship of those two and how Kobe Bryant's game was remarkably similar to Michael Jordan's game. They had sort of a big brother, little brother relationship. The star power is just unbelievable in this class, and Michael Jordan inducting Kobe Bryant just adds to it.
This would be akin to Marlon Brando inducting Robert De Niro into the Actors Hall of Fame, right?
Is there an Actors Hall of Fame?
Maybe there should be.
There should be.
Maybe you have to work on that. Of course there should be. There's a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Why not have an Actors Hall of Fame with a picture of Daniel Day-Lewis and Meryl Streep, the two greatest actors ever, at the forefront? Donald Trump doesn't think Meryl Streep was that good of an actress, so that makes me feel even stronger that I think she's the greatest of all time. But yeah, the star power here is incredible. You've got Michael Jordan, who's still the biggest star in basketball, and he hasn't played in 18 years. He's still the biggest name in basketball, and will
people
remain
are going
so.
To be bawling, crying during that speech.
This is going to be amazing. It really is.
It's going to be the Kobe Bryant one's going to be so emotional. And Michael Jordan's he's a crier. We've seen it before.
He cried at the ceremony for Kobe Bryant a year ago at Staples Center. He loved Kobe Bryant. You nailed it, Jet. That was his little brother. They were so similar. Their drive to win, their games were so similar. Heck, the first 5 years in the league, Kobe seemed to be doing a Michael Jordan impression, not just in the way he played, the way he walked and the way he talked. But people accepted that, right? They kind of saw it because their games were eerily similar. Like, we know LeBron loves Michael Jordan. That's his idol growing up. Their games are nothing alike.
No.
So Kobe didn't win number 23. Instead, he wore number 24. He's such a competitive guy. He's probably like, I'll go one number higher than Michael Jordan because I think I'm
first
better.
It was 8, and then he switched.
First
to
it was
24.
8, then he went to 24. This is going to be phenomenal. Obviously, with Kobe passing away a year ago, this is just going to dominate the proceedings, right?
So is his wife going to give the speech? Do you imagine, Sap?
I would hope so. I would hope so, unless if she cannot make it through it, she may get so emotional. And again, this is not what she does. She's a pretty private person, especially the last year, I would think.
Yeah.
Maybe Jerry West gives the speech because Jerry West also loved Kobe Bryant. He traded for him in 1996. They had a very close relationship. I mean, just think of the star power of Michael Jordan inducting Kobe Bryant and accepting on Kobe's behalf as Jerry West and be like, you've got Michael Jordan, who you think is the greatest player of all time, Kobe Bryant, who's a reasonable facsimile of, and then the logo shows up to accept the induction. That would be cool. The person I feel bad for is Tim Duncan, once again, who's overshadowed. He's part of the proceedings, and no one's going to remember anything about Tim Duncan being inducted.
That speech is going to be a snoozer.
It's perfect, right? It's perfect for Tim Duncan, who, by the way, of the three major stars being inducted, to me is the best player.
I agree.
You know how I power rank everybody. I've got Tim Duncan is the 8th greatest player of all time. Kobe is the 9th, and Kevin Garnett is the 19th. So we're seeing 3 top 20 players.
Oh, the class is special. Incredible. It's an incredible class.
Then you've got Michael Jordan inducting Kobe Bryant. David Robinson is inducting Tim Duncan, which is
perfect.
Perfect.
By the way, yep.
Two kind of dull guys who were just great players. And to me,
this one doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain this to me?
I've got a couple of theories on this. Isaiah Thomas, who I think is grossly underrated. For some reason, people forget how great Isaiah Thomas was.
Because he's a dick. That's why.
There's a lot of dicks that are still considered great players, right? I have Isaiah Thomas as the 28th greatest player of all time. I have David Robinson at 26. I may have to tweak those because I like trolling people and moving Isaiah up
David Robinson
a little bit. He was fantastic. He was phenomenal. I mean,
I just saw him in a commercial. He looks the same.
He's in phenomenal shape. He had the best body in the NBA then. He looks the same now. I think he's got the receding hairline, which is pretty common when you start reaching 50 or whatever he is. I think he's a little over 50, actually. Isaiah Thomas is going to induct Kevin Garnett. Now, it's not the Isaiah Thomas who played with the Celtics. It's the real Isaiah Thomas. Garnett, I know he grew up partly in South Carolina, but I think he grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
Both. Isaiah Thomas is from Chicago. And even though Isaiah Thomas played for the Pistons, he's still kind of a Chicago legend. Maybe he's doing that, or maybe he's just trolling Michael Jordan, because we know Michael Jordan and Isaiah Thomas don't like each other. And maybe this is Kevin Garnett's way of tweaking Michael Jordan. Just a wild theory.
Have you ever seen Garnett and Isaiah Thomas, or either of them talk about each other or mention each other?
No, because there's old players that will reference Isaiah Thomas and say, don't forget about him. He was an all-time great player. With Jalen Rose, I think, is always out there saying, don't forget about Isaiah Thomas. He might be the second best point guard of all time. By the way, Michael Jordan thinks that Isaiah Thomas is the second greatest point guard of all time after Magic Johnson. So it's not like Michael Jordan doesn't understand how great Isaiah was. They just don't like each other.
Right. Well, very few people seem to like Isaiah Thomas.
Or in some ways, Michael Jordan. I think people are frightened of Michael Jordan more than anything.
Yeah.
No one's going to criticize him because he may punch you. That's in his DNA. That's the one I'm looking forward to seeing. Not quite as much as Michael Jordan inducting Kobe Bryant. That you can't top that. You couldn't make that up. But it is a weird thing.
Does the Hall assign them, or the players must have some input?
Oh, I'm assuming that Kobe's wife.
They had to reach Duncan on his landline, I'm sure.
Yeah, or they sent him a fax. They sent him a fax. He'll probably not even wear a suit because he shops at Target. Poor Tim Duncan. I mean, this is perfect. Like, no one's going to even remember he's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's the best player getting inducted. But yeah, I would think that the players pick the guy they want. Whether it be a former player, which it normally is, or
so I'm interested to hear Garnett explain this one. If there's more, because there's got to be more to it than Chicago.
That's the only thing I can.
Right?
Connect.
They must have some relationship.
They never played against each other because Garnett came in '95 and Isaiah was already retired.
Here's the thing,
doesn't make much sense.
Jordan and Kobe had the brother relationship, and they did play against each other, albeit it's towards the end of Jordan's career. Duncan and Robinson won, I think, 2 titles together. And played together for a while. The thing is with Garnett, he had such little talent around him on the Timberwolves for most of his career. None of those guys even sniffed the Hall of Fame.
And he hated most of them, right?
And he hated most of them. So nobody from Minnesota's in the Hall of Fame. When he was in the Celtics.
Milbury. Yeah.
Milbury.
You
think of Mike Milbury.
Mike Milbury, yes. Mike Milbury would make as much.
And the Celtics guys that he played with aren't in yet. So.
No. Pierce is going to get in
next year.
Pierce is a finalist, so he'll get Pierce in. He's definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame, first-time inductee. Ray Allen's not going to be the guy. And is Ray Allen in yet?
Is Ray Allen in yet? If he's not, it's just because the time hasn't come up.
Because I think his last year in the league was 2014, so I think he's in. I mean, you can check on the Google machine.
Yeah, he's in. Okay, he is in.
He's in. Okay, yeah, I think he was the class of 2019 because he retired in 14. Then Garnett retired. Then Pierce retired. Remember, Pierce hung on and played with the Clippers for a half a year.
Yeah, no, it wasn't going to be Ray Allen because they hate him now.
They hate each other. And Rondo's not in the Hall of Fame. Do you have to be in the Hall of Fame to present another Hall of Famer? Okay, so this is kind of like the mob, right? You're a made man at that point. So,
at least that's what it is now. I'm not sure if that's always been the case, Sap, or that it's it's something that is more recent. I like it. I think it's a cool tradition.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, no, I can't wait for this. And then obviously, probably this is going to take place May 15th. And then the class of 2021 should be inducted in September when it normally happens, just before the start of the season. So Paul Pierce is going to make it. Again, I'm hoping Marcus Johnson and Chris Webber make it. Maybe Marcus Johnson will have me as a presenter, although I'm not a Hall of Famer. But yeah, those three. First of all, I just keep thinking of Duncan and Robinson being. First of all, it sounds like a play or a song.
Well, Duncan Robinson is a
Duncan
player.
Robinson. Yeah, Duncan Robinson. That's right. The Miami Heat sharpshooter. Tim Duncan, David Robinson, and Avery Johnson was the point guard.
Yeah.
And Sean Elliott also played on that team.
Oh, yeah.
Could you find a more mature team than that?
No.
Like a boring, mature team. Like they wouldn't fit into today's NBA. That is
Very
a dull
boring
team. Like Shannon Sharp likes to talk about the San Antonio Spurs. He calls them broccoli. Yeah, it's good for you, but you don't like eating it. The Spurs won 5 titles without, other than maybe Steven Jackson, who I think won one of them, with like no personality. I mean, Manu had a little personality. Parker had a little personality, right? But
not really.
Not really, no. It's the Patriots because Popovich, like Belichick, he was running a tight ship. And again, because Duncan allowed Popovich to coach him any way that Popovich found necessary, it worked. This is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and there's also, there's big time presenters for these other guys too, big names. Jordan's also inducting Kim Mulkey. I don't know what the connection is there, but he is.
She's angry. He's angry. So maybe that's going to work out well.
Rudy Tomjanovich getting introduced by Calvin Murphy and Hakeem Olajuwon. Two obviously great players. Hakeem, one of the absolute great centers of all time. Eddie Sutton is getting inducted by some very famous coaches, John Calipari and Bill Self. As well as Sidney Moncrief.
Sidney Moncrief was his best player at Arkansas, yep.
Tamika Catchings is getting introduced by Alonzo Mourning and Don Staley. I didn't know Alonzo Mourning was in the Hall of Fame, but I guess he is.
Yeah, he did. Everybody makes the Hall of Fame. That's why I still don't understand how Chris Webber's not in the Hall of Fame.
Borderline to me, Alonzo Mourning.
Chris
Great
Webber?
guy.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Alonzo.
Great guy. Yeah. Again, Basketball Hall of Fame, so you got to also include what they did in college. Now, Alonzo Mourning didn't win a championship in college, but he was a dominant player in college. Dikembe Mutombo's in the Hall of Fame.
He won a bunch of Defensive Player of the Year awards, though. He won like 5 of them, Sap.
I would say Mourning was the better player, though. Better all-around player, more well-rounded. He was part of a championship team. He wasn't the key guy on it, but he played on the 2006 Miami Heat. So everyone gets in except Chris Webber for some reason.
And your guy, Marcus Johnson.
Yeah, Marcus Johnson. Marcus Johnson was better than Adrian Dantley and Alex English. Problem with Marcus Johnson is he sustained a really bad neck injury when he was like 31 and didn't play again, so he had kind of a shortened career. But he had a great college career, won a national championship, was College Player of the Year as a senior. I think he belongs in there. And he was good in White Men Can't Jump.
This is going to be the most watched Hall of Fame ceremony since Jordan was inducted, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely. No, this is going to be incredible to watch. I mean, because you don't see Jordan in public all that much. I mean, we saw him in
no, you really don't.
The Last Dance, but that's a documentary. This is going to be natural. This is going to be unfiltered. It's going to be raw.
It's going to be so emotional.
It's going to be so emotional. It's, that's his kid brother. I think he looked at Kobe as his kid brother. And I'm sure the day after the ceremony, Skip Bayless will be on Undisputed and will be bashing LeBron James for some apparent reason.
Do you think?
Because he's not Kobe and he's not Michael.
Do you think Shaq was ever in consideration to do this?
They had their issues, but they kind of resolved them. But how can you go wrong with Michael Jordan? I mean, that's like
no, I'm not saying he's the wrong pick. I'm just curious, because Shaq, it made more logical sense because they, those were the championship.
Won 3 titles together. Yeah, I mean,
they're tied to each other. I mean,
that's a good
their
question.
Careers are.
That's a really good question. Maybe.
I'm sure Shaq would give a great speech too, right?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, again, he doesn't always have a filter, but I think on that particular night, he'd know to have a filter. I don't know if Charles Barkley has ever inducted someone. That would be fun because you don't know what Charles would say.
He won't induct any of the new players.
No,
Sorry.
not at all. It's got to be someone that's really old. Charles, to me, would be like the bad best man speech that the bride and groom absolutely are scared to bleep about, that they're going to say something completely stupid like is it the Geico commercial where the guy's up there going, hey, 3 rings in 4 years? That's known as a dynasty, Yeah,
I know what you're saying. Yeah, I forget which company does that commercial.
But it's the bad best man. Look, I'm going to be a co-best man at my friend's wedding in July. I got to make sure I'm buttoned up for that. I don't drink, so I'm not going to be in an alcohol days. So I'll be okay. But yeah, no, Shaq would have been interesting. But look, maybe MJ wanted to do this. Maybe he said, can I do this? Because Kobe and I had a great relationship. And how do you say no to Michael Jordan?
No, you don't. And yeah, listen, I hope that the Bryant family is able to, appreciate the night and say, like, take it in as an honor, and that it's not too difficult for them, because it is an honor. And obviously Kobe's one of the great players of all time. It's just, there's not going to be a dry eye in the house. It's going to be really tough to get through, but it's going to be, it's a nice, because we've had all this pandemic stuff, Sap, and he died, and then there was like barely any time to grieve because 2 months later we're in the middle of this pandemic, and he doesn't get to go into the Hall of Fame on time. And so, like, this is like kind of the culmination of celebrating the life and legacy of Kobe Bryant is this Hall of Fame ceremony. So it's a big deal, and I think it's going to be widely watched and widely quoted afterwards. Jordan gave a great Hall of Fame speech, I thought, when he got in. It was very FU to everybody else, but I loved it. And so I'd imagine that he's when he wants to, he's an excellent speaker. When he wants to step out in public, I'm saying. So I think it'll be a great speech.
Yeah, I mean, the guy was the greatest of performers, right, on the basketball court, so he's not going to shy away from giving a speech. I'm sure he's looking forward to it, although it's going to be difficult for him because of how close he was with Kobe. I still can't believe Kobe's gone. Because
I can't believe the daughter died with him too. Holy crap!
And 9 other people. I mean, it was just. I remember I was out on a Sunday and Twitter just blew up. And friends started texting me, "Is this real? Is this?" I'm like, "What?" And you find out that this happened. It was just so sad because I thought Kobe was going to be even more interesting in the second half of his life after basketball. He won an Oscar.
I think a lot of people were expecting that.
So smart. I still maintain. Of all the great players, Bill Russell, obviously, along with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Kobe, to me were the 3 most worldly. I mean, Kobe grew up in Italy, spoke multiple languages. He had a worldview. Kareem, brilliant. Bill Russell, brilliant, lived through so many difficult times. Those are the 3 guys I always thought of, okay, these are the guys that when they speak, we want to listen. It's still sad. I still can't believe it.
No, I don't think anybody can. It's like, when the great rock star dies, it's impossible to believe. When we get closer to this May 15th induction day, we'll have to just do a whole show, talking about Kobe.
And the thing you brought up,
it deserves more time.
Oh, I mean, he deserves all the time necessary. And you bring a good point because this happened in January of 2020. It was a week before the Super Bowl, the Chiefs beating the 49ers. And, a month later, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Maybe there'll be some symmetry here. Look, the pandemic doesn't just magically end, and it didn't magically begin either. But, maybe May 15th, this is kind of like a closure of what happened to Kobe, and maybe we can start moving on, which I think we are, provided, people are getting the vaccine and still being safe about what they do out there. This is going to be incredible. May 15th, and then the next class will be inducted 4 or 5 months later.
Yeah, which is the right way to do it because you don't want to overcrowd it.
No.
And so it's a great class. It's one of the best classes, if not the best class I can remember in terms of just overall. Like, I mean, Rudy Tomjanovich is getting completely overshadowed here. No one's even going to talk about him. We'll talk about it more, I guess, as that deadline approaches. But he's a basketball lifer, and then like you said, well deserved to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, Tamika Catchings, one of the great women's player of all time.
Yeah, absolutely, one of the great.
It would have been cool if her dad was able to induct her because Harvey Catchings actually played those Bucks teams in the early '80s. He was a backup center, guy who played like 18 minutes a game. But you're Hall of Fame to induct enough. One. Yeah, that's interesting. And I am going to the Baseball Hall of Fame in June. and I'm going to wear my Barry Bonds shirt, and I'll probably be asked to leave because somehow
Yes.
he's not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. But we'll storm the Baseball Hall of Fame to try to get Barry in there. But first, we got to get Chris Webber into the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield.
The Basketball Hall of Fame lets too many people in. This is the rare class where it's like, okay, everybody, yep, this makes sense. Garnett, yep. Duncan, yep. Kobe Bryant. You don't even have to think about it.
No, these are like no-brainers. And like I said, maybe there's certain guys like I Kobe, Duncan, Garnett, they're no-brainers. Maybe, you shorten the period before they can get in. Like, I know hockey does that. Like Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux, Bobby Orr, they retired. It's like, why do we wait 5 years for this?
Yeah, what are they just like so unsure that they're going to not return to playing? I don't really. It doesn't.
There's no
sense.
question. I mean, the Roberto Clemente, 1972 season ended. He died in a plane crash that December. He was planning on coming back to play. I think the Baseball Hall of Fame sped up the process and put him in. But look at Kobe. I mean, if he could have gone right in, say, a 2-year period, he would have been alive to see this. Now, no one was planning on Kobe dying at 41, 42 years old. You don't expect that to happen. But there's going to be a lot of tears when Michael Jordan speaks. And I can't remember the last time we saw 3 top 20 players being inducted together.
That's no, and it might not happen again for a while.
No,
I mean, it's the odds say that it probably won't happen again.
No, I mean, I probably have to do some research to see if anything like that. Maybe the original class of the Hall of Fame. That happens sometimes where, okay, there's Russell and Chamberlain and whoever else. That's pretty tough to top those guys. But that's pretty amazing that we're going to see these 3 great players. And once again, Tim Duncan overshadowed. And you know what? I don't think he minds.
Nope. His speech is going to be 40 seconds long. Thank you. Where can I get this validated, please?
Yes, I want to save money there. And where can I bring this tuxedo back, which I had to rent? He probably doesn't even own a tuxedo.
Please point me to the nearest Target or Kmart.
Yes, exactly. Amazing. What an incredible superstar he was. He was the anti-superstar, if anything.
Yeah. So that's going to do it for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. As always, we are presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out their website, fullpresscoverage.com. This and other great podcasts and articles. Check out the show on YouTube, youtube.com/JetStride. Remember to like and subscribe, leave a comment, and hope you enjoy the show. We will talk to you later. See you, everybody.